When it comes to choosing gifts, others have told me that I have an uncanny knack for finding just the right one. Honestly, I could never get just anything for just anyone. Instead, I like to do my homework on people in order to figure out how to surprise them with something really meaningful. One time, while I was over at the home of my dad and stepmother, I happened to notice that they were keeping their Tiffany lamp on a folding TV tray. An antique Tiffany lamp with its heavy stained glass shade on top of only this shabby, wobbly, and flimsy TV tray? Not good. Especially if there were to happen something like their cat scampering through underneath it, knocking it over. So several weeks later, on Christmas, I watched their delight as they opened their present for me. It was a kit for a much nicer looking and sturdier wooden end table. After Dad assembled it, it became the lamp's new home. Then another time, I was wandering around this one store trying to figure out what to get my mom for Christmas. Several times, I'd all but decided on one item only to put it back a moment later. You'd think I'm really hopeless. But I finally decided on a coffee mug that Mom could look at and always be reminded of her oldest son and his sense of humor. The mug had the following quote: "Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing why we do not serve it in fruit salad." Wisdom. What is it? What does it really mean to be wise? Webster's describes it as, in part, as insight, prudence, discretion, having the ability to discern properly as to what's true or appropriate, especially in the context of specific situations under specific and certain circumstances. True wisdom looks at the world and finds out how things work best, including, among other things, what's always appropriate for the right place at the right time. In the Old Testament, the original Hebrew term in context is bokhmah, meaning literally skill in living. In relation to who God is as a person, one writer describes his wisdom as that attribute by virtue of which he always acts with full knowledge and correct values. As God is perfect, so also is his wisdom. He is infinite, all-knowing, and all-wise. I believe that Scripture, as God's inspired word and written revelation of himself to all of us, can be considered more than sufficient as a source in looking to him for wisdom. It is found throughout Scripture. In fact, certain books of it, for instance, those of James and also Proverbs, are of a genre which is called wisdom literature. The purpose of these books is a basis for practical holiness and skill in life, as it is when built upon the fear of God. In the first chapter of Proverbs, verses 2 through 7 illustrate this quite well. For gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. For understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Also consider this from chapter 1, verse 5 of James. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. It is available to anyone, any place, any time, and under all kinds of circumstances. In chapter 4 of Proverbs, it is Solomon's exhortation to anyone reading to acquire wisdom, acquire understanding. The beginning of wisdom is acquire wisdom. And with all your acquiring, get understanding. Originally in the Hebrew, the term for to acquire is kana, meaning not only exactly this, but also to create, buy, possess, obtain. Depending on your verb tense in context, it can also mean to be bought or to cause to possess. In one Oxford Dictionary of English, to acquire is additionally defined as to obtain something by buying or having it given to you, and also to gain something by your own efforts, ability, or behavior. Basically speaking, the original Latin roots of the term have to do with a combination of seeking and getting something. In other words, continuing to endeavor to obtain something in addition to what one might already have. Some examples, as rendered in other translations of our passage from Proverbs 4, include, above all and before all, do this. Get wisdom. Write this at the top of your list. Get understanding. And also, wisdom is supreme, so get wisdom. And whatever else you get understanding. The first step to becoming wise is to look for wisdom. So use everything you have to get understanding. The beginning of wisdom is get wisdom. Skillful and godly wisdom. For skillful and godly wisdom is the principal thing. And with all you have gotten, get understanding, discernment, comprehension, and interpretation. Wisdom is something to be sought. It is not the kind of thing for which you should wait until it comes and finds you. It's something we proactively have to seek, even if necessary, to making great sacrifices. In subsequent verses of Proverbs chapter 4, Solomon goes on to mention some of the benefits of acquiring wisdom. Love her, and she will watch over you. Do not forsake her, and she will guard you. Prize her, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. She will place on your head a garland of grace. She will present you with a crown of beauty. When you walk, your steps will not be impeded, and if you run, you will not stumble. Where do we find wisdom? One way is well expressed in Proverbs 1, 20, and 21. Out in the open, wisdom calls aloud. She raises her voice in the public square. On top of the wall, she cries out. At the city gate, she makes her speech. In other words, wisdom comes through experience. That's experience as we go through it in everyday life, but with reflection on it and evaluation of it afterward. Examples of this might include endeavoring to apply theory to practice, testing of a claim you've heard someone else make, and also perhaps the calling of a bluff, and also from observing firsthand what others go through, for better and for worse. Ever heard of the expressions, we learn from our mistakes, or by trial and error? In the wisdom literature and everywhere throughout Scripture, God's wisdom is found, and so as it relates to all kinds of topics. Loving things versus loving people. Saying the right thing at the right time, in the right manner. Work, management of time and money. Friendship, leadership, sex, and much more. And while I don't really know if this extends to the question of tomatoes and fruit salad, I do know that it does have something to say when it comes to teaching. For any teacher, Proverbs 22:6 speaks to the importance of knowing not only your subject matter, but also the hearts of whoever it is you are teaching. Then there is also Luke 6:40 on why a teacher should be careful and diligent to set a good example for others on whom they have influence. Wisdom is also useful in dealing with people. As teachers, how much of our job description has to do with this? Especially with the hard reality of how people come in all shapes and sizes. For instance, with colleagues, administrators, parents, and others who hold a measure of influence over you. Or perhaps those over whom you hold a measure of influence. As a teacher, with which there is sometimes a very fine line between what constitutes appropriate use of that influence and what constitutes a misuse of it. Consider a learner who is the class clown goof-off type, or maybe one who is autistic, or even one of those A+ academic perfectionists. In spite of joys that come with all of them, there are also challenges. What is required in being able to look at different situations and know the most appropriate way to deal with each of them? Wisdom. In situations in which you face, both in your classroom and out, how might you find it useful, more beneficial, necessary? Or perhaps, in your experience, have you ever seen a price to be paid dearly, which resulted from a lack of wisdom? In either of these cases, why so? And if you should ever find yourself in a similar situation, how will you go about it? How will you not go about it? Wisdom, skill in living. Again, it has to do with the ability to discern properly what's true or right. True wisdom always looks at the world. It evaluates what it experiences and finds out what's appropriate for right then, in the right place, at the right time. It figures out what works best, what does not, and why. It's something God has to give generously without finding fault to all who ask him for it. But it is not after his heart that you wait for it to come and find you. In other words, not to be learning lessons more the hard way from costly mistakes. Beforehand, it's always better to proactively go out and find it. Or to put it another way, as one might go shopping for a sturdier and more complimentary looking end table today, in order that the lovely stained glass on the Tiffany lamp is not laying smashed into tiny shards all over the floor tomorrow.